Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Correspondence. We're corresponding, but certification course also. Welcome to all of those who are overseas, those in Abilene, and those throughout the United States. Once again, we'd like to welcome you to the class and a continual reminder, because we still get some questions asking about the books. The book that we're in right now is the first of 5 series in the junior high series, and it is called the Character Unit, and that's, once again, the first of 5 series. We're leading into the Acceptance Unit, but you can download this book free if you're watching on Facebook right now. It's at the very top of our message board there where you're watching class. You can download it for free, and you can join along. And tonight we're going to be on page 121. We're going to be picking up where our last teacher, David, left off and covering what we've learned in this ripple effect. And we're going to be tying a lot of things together, and that's what we want to stress with the What I Have Learned section when we get into this. Now, of course, what I have learned, we're tying in this present chapter we're in, but we also want to connect with the other things that we've learned. We want to start putting these pieces together that we've learned from the very beginning, because once again, always remember that in the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program, we're building one layer upon another layer upon another layer, and everything that we've learned thus far, it's important to remember, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge to remember all those things. It's a lot, but as we build one upon another, and you'll see when we get into the other units, the next one being the Acceptance Unit, that we'll rehearse a lot of things we went through here, just adding a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more as we go. And that way we can gradually build to building a positive moral character, because as we've said before, it's not done overnight. It's something that is a process, and we just have to be moving in the right direction. And education, as we've said, knowledge is power, and the knowledge will give us the power to put an end to situations that David spoke about in the class last time, and then we had a couple speakers before that have spoke about what we're seeing in society and how that's rippling outwardly. And of course, over on page 121, David started covering the What I Had Learned section, and he covered the first 5, and we'll read over them just quickly and discuss them briefly. And of course, the first one was the effects of character, both positive and negative. They ripple outward from the individual to other families, to their family and community. And I want to bring your mind to this. Back on page 35, it's really important that we remember, because we kind of look to society, and when we see negative things take place in society, we kind of, we like placing the blame on here or there, but where did the Peaceful Solution, where did we first hear that these positive role models, these teachers, that they're very important into our life? And we were told, once again, it can't be overstated. And if you look on page 35, and this ties back into the preface that we'll get to in a second, but the second paragraph here, notice it says the role of parents and the family in shaping a positive or negative character cannot be overstated. And that's what we're talking about with this ripple effect. And of course, whenever you drop the pond, that stone in the pond, when you see the ripple, of course it looks bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes out. But you have to remember, it all started from the first ripple that led to the second ripple that leads to the third ripple to the fourth ripple. And a lot of problems that we're seeing today in society, well, we're wanting to look at the ripple that's the 20th or 25th or the 30th ripple out, and we neglect to go back and look at, well, what did the stone, when it was dropped in the pond, what did it first cause? What was the first effect of the dropping of the stone? Because it can be either positive or negative. And, of course, the preface, and this goes to show the power of a positive influence, and this is for those of you that might just be tuning in and you haven't ever read it. I would encourage everyone to read it. We're not going to reread it tonight, but it's on page XV in the very beginning of your book. And the influence from the teacher, it was a ripple effect that occurred in the author's life, Yisrael Hawkins, from a few words, just a few words his father said in his presence, and it caused this rippling effect of the creation of a program that has not just the first ripple when he wrote it and he put a team together to bring these books to pass, But this program has rippled throughout not just the state of Texas, not just the United States, not just North America, South America. It's in all parts of the world today. And that's positive character. That's positive, the rippling effect in a positive way. But once again, when we look at society and communities, remember we have to look first in our own households. That's where it starts. This pond that is dropped, it's a teaching, or a lack thereof. And if you can imagine this stone when it's dropped, either positive education that's been going out or the lack of education that's going out. And if you can think about this tonight, as we'll go through some articles and some topics here in our lesson plan, there's very common ingredients that are involved in either solving problems or not solving problems. What we see in society, time is needed to solve them or to let them go. If you let them go, you're wasting time. But if you're going to solve them, you still need time. You have to educate. If you're not going to solve them, you just come up with more policies with no answers. And when I say that, I'll show you where I'm quoting that tonight. From leaders who say that we can explain, and then the very next sentence they say we have no idea. Now, I think that's the honesty coming out. We really don't know how to solve these things. But we have to acknowledge time is needed and education is needed. Now, if we take the time that we've been taking for many, many years and we don't educate, that ripple effect just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And we think, well, it dropped and it's going out, but now it's small in this section. As you drop it in, it goes out, but it kind of dissipates as it goes out from the inner parts out. And we think we've escaped it. Well, we've escaped the worst part of the drop, this lack of education, but really we haven't. And we'll see tonight how it spreads through a society, and we'll get into how positive character, this positive ripple effect, can actually fix things in society. Now, the second point he covered also was negative character traits, such as dishonesty and a lack of respect, compassion, can lead to violence and crime. Now, we're in a time in our lives that most people have never seen, to where crime and violence has reached the Capitol building. Distrust is just wide among people that are supposed to be making decisions. And once again, not to make this political, but if you go online or you just watch the news, most people say they don't trust the ones that we've elected in office to make decisions for us or to create rules or laws. Well, if you have a body that distrusts the leaders, you've got a problem, because those people were supposed to be the ones that vote the leaders in, and now they're not trusting them. Well, when you have something like that, you have, as we've seen at the Capitol building, a lack of disrespect, and it's irrelevant to who they say calls them to go. What calls them to go was this teaching of a lack of disrespect. It's been going on for many years. To say that what we're seeing in society today was caused within the last 4 years or the last 8 years, or to blame it on President Biden or President Trump or President Obama, that wouldn't be true. Because these are just problems that the ripple's just getting bigger. We've seen this long ago. And the ripple effect just keeps getting bigger and bigger, but it's going in a negative way. And the positivity that we should be teaching, that's the power. Remember, the knowledge that we offer, this education, is not being offered. So there's a lot of time being given, but there's no steps in a positive direction that's been taken. And that's why it's getting bigger, and it's getting bigger, and it's getting bigger. Well, continuing on to the third one, we see that negative character can also lead to engaging in risky behaviors, premarital sex, drugs, underage drinking, can tear my life apart and the life of my family. Now, I want to show you a few articles with this statistics that are coming out in the news, and of course they're showing how well we're doing. Now you see here, America's STD rates hit record high for 6th year in a row. Now, if we're doing something to put an end to this or to make this a better situation, we should see a decline in this. We should not see an increase in this. This should be a decline. When we see for 6 years in a row, we know there's a problem. But you got to read these articles very carefully because it's actually 7. You see here it says reported STDs reach all-time high for 6th consecutive year. But if you notice closely here, this was for 2019. CDC 2019 data provides the most recent full picture of STD trends in the United States before the COVID pandemic. Preliminary 2020 data study that many of these concerning trends continued. So we're going to see a 7th. Well, what are we doing about it? And can we honestly say that the policies in place, the education that's being offered, can we honestly say that's working? No. And remember, we've talked about abortions before this. And once again, as has been stated many times, it's a life that has to be terminated. That's just a scientific fact. And if we're teaching and we're educating on how to make better decisions and better choices, we should see a decline in these things. But we're not. Of course, then we have the rise in murders in the United States explained. Now, this rise that's being explained, I want you to notice the next thing they say. The homicide rate is significantly up in American cities. Here are some explanations why. Now, I'll read you what they say, and then I've got another one I want to show you where they're explaining. It says some experts have cited the protesters this summer over the police killings of George Floyd, and others which could have had a range of effects from officers pulling back from their duties to greater community distrust in police, leading to more unchecked violence. Others point to a bad economy. Another potential factor is a huge increase in gun purchases this year. Still another is boredom and social displacement as a result of physical distancing, leading people to cause more trouble. So you see a couple theories there. Here's another one. If you'll notice it, I got it too high there. 2020 historic surge in murders explained. Notice the next sentence. We still don't know why murders in the United States rose so much. But here's what we do know. Now, these are people that put together studies, CDC and other organizations that put these together. I want you to listen to what, these are people that's supposed to be putting together statistics to help create better policy. And it says, we still don't know why murders surged last year. Experts have some theories. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted everyday life, a breakdown of police community relations, an increase in the number of guns purchased. One or all of these factors could have played a role, but there could also be other reasons we don't know yet. That we don't know yet what caused the 2020 murder surge isn't surprising. Why would that not be surprising? To this day, there's still a lot of debate and disagreement among experts about what has caused the massive increase of crime and violence in 2020. So once again, the article says that they can explain it, but when you read the article, the honesty comes out. We really don't have any idea. Well, once again, if we have education in place that is supposed to be beneficial, we should see a decrease. Now, this isn't a swipe or an aggressive, lunge at education policy. What we're saying is, let's step back, take a deep breath, and give a look into what we're doing, what we're educating our children, our adults. What are we offering society? Not just in a local scale here in the state of Texas, which has a lot of situations going on its own that is trying to be dealt with, but also the United States, but other countries. How we can all come together as one instead of standing on borders and making threats toward each other, because that has solved nothing. In fact, today, in today's news, you hear more about nuclear war than anything else. And when nuclear war discussions come out, STDs won't sound so bad. Murders in your country won't sound so bad. Please go look at these things. Google them. Look them up for yourselves and see what's taking place in our society. We're going in the wrong direction. The negative ripple effect is going the wrong way. And that's exactly what is trying to be explained by the author here. And remember, these books were written many years ago. If we could have implemented them years ago, what change could we have seen? Well, we have to start soon to do this. We have to put forth the effort. And what I'm trying to do is encourage everyone that if you start helping together, we can do this. The next thing that David covered was the rate of school dropouts. And this was the fourth one here. The rate of school dropouts and the cost of prevention and intervention programs are only a few of the ways the community suffers when teens engage in risky behaviors. And of course, we read one of the major causes of dropping out of school, if you remember, it's in the All About Me section, it was teenage pregnancies. And of course, teenage pregnancies were leading to many abortions. Once again, when we see the teenage pregnancies, and if you don't have that, let me give you that page number so you can write it down. And this is something you can read over. You can write it beside there, but read over page 113. And we'll look at the first paragraph under the bullet points here. On 113, it says, the consequences of choosing to engage in these behaviors, and you see the bullet points here of premarital sex, excessive consumption of alcohol, use of drugs and inhalants, dangerous driving habits, and improper handling of guns, the consequence of choosing to engage in these behaviors will affect not only you, but will ripple outward to your family, friends, and even the community. Risky behaviors can alter your life and rob you of a healthy mind and body. Once again, when a young lady ends up at the abortion clinic and she's getting an abortion, that's not the first ripple. That's many ripples outwardly. That's not the first decision that's bringing harm. That's decisions afterwards. Whenever a young man or young woman ends up at the doctor's office due to a contracting of an STD, that's not the beginning of the problem. The beginning of the problem is much closer to home. And we have to start seeing that and acknowledging that. So looking back here on page 121 and keeping these things in mind, we see the next and last one that David covered was the negative character results in fear, hatred, conflicts, and violence between nations. Eventually, the conflict between nations escalates into war. And of course, turn over to page 106. And David covered some of these things. But when you talk about pushing and shoving, and we think about bullying, well, here on page 106, we see the page entitled The Ripple Effect, and it says, two of the most devastating results of negative character in our society and our world are violence and crime. Well, we see crimes going up and violence is going up. The ripple effects from violence and crime have an impact on everyone. And that's one thing that we have to realize, that just like COVID-19 impacted everyone, when nations are sanctioned, when these acts of war take place, when countries become bitter with others, they affect everyone. When a nation sanctions, such as the United States sanctions China, or China sanctions the United States, whenever there's money involved, the countries aren't paying for it. It's the citizens of the countries that are affected by these things. These costs are just passed on. Just like when someone steals something out of Walmart, as was brought out, it ups the price 7 cents for everything that is stolen. They have to up 7 cents on the dollar, by the way. So for everything you buy at Walmart, that price is raised 7 cents on every dollar to cover the items that are stolen. Well, think about, how does this affect you on a global scale? When you get things in from other countries, when countries are dealing with each other in a very dishonorable way, when the pushing and shoving takes place. Well, continuing on here, it says the victims will most likely become afraid and overprotective of her or his belongings. This fear and distrust will ripple outwards to his or her friends, their families, and to their neighborhoods. Well, this is also, once again, on a global scale. It just doesn't affect us in a community. It affects us as a country, and it affects us as a society as a whole, speaking on a global aspect, when these things are done. And of course, you look over here and you have the school safety, and I'm not going to go into detail. You'll need to go through the last class because David covered these in detail, and the other teachers have also. But you have the school safety, the crime violence, and of course the music itself. And then looking over to page 109, you have violence leads to violence with the Hatfields and the McCoys. And then, of course, you had the Rodney King case of 1991. And then continuing on, you had the Indian violence and the September the 11th, 2001 violence. And we tend to think, well, time will heal all wounds. But once again, step back and look, and truly in society, since September the 11th, that was a very, if you were alive at that time, it got your attention. That day got everyone's attention. It put a stop on everything. Even the TV stations just locked into reporting that. The main 3 or 4 here in the United States, from CBS to ABC to NBC, they all locked in and they covered this continually. No commercials, nothing for days. Well, since that attack, what have we done on a global scale to bring friendships, to make friends, to cause this negative ripple effect that took place? What have we done to make it better? Well, we went to war. That's what we've done. And has it made it better? I'm asking you to ask yourself. Has war made it better? Has it made a change? Or has it made everyone more cautious that with time, something else is going to take place? It's going to be worse. Because this ripple effect is what we see. When we see the buildings fall in New York City, that's not the first part of the ripple effect. That's many, many, many ripple effects away from the initial problem itself. So with those things in mind, we're going to move forward here on page 121 and finish the What I Have Learned section. And we're going to put together a lot of the things that not only we learn in this chapter, but talk about some things that we've covered from the beginning of the book. It says, when individuals and society as a whole maintain and consistently demonstrate positive character traits such as honesty, respect, and compassion, can ripple outward, showing others the value of a positive character. So when these things are done, they can show others the value of a positive character. I want to first read you the definition, and this is from Merriam-Webster, and then we'll kind of look at what the Peaceful Solution also says about the word compassion. Because having compassion on someone, now the Peaceful Solution defines this as an act of empathy, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, so you can kind of understand what's going on in their life and why it's taking place. Now, Merriam-Webster says it's sympathetic. But when we say feeling sorry that someone's in a bad situation doesn't help them, putting yourself in their shoes and actually working to figure out what caused the situation and then what part you can play in it to make it better, that will be more of a positive role that we can play in someone's life. But it defines it as a sympathetic, conscientious, being conscientious of others, distressed together with a desire to alleviate it. So in other words, you put yourself along with that person and you look together to find a way to alleviate or to rid the problem at hand. Now, the thing with compassion that we have to learn, being compassionate isn't just seeing a problem and going, in time, it'll change. Well, once again, look out at society. Since 2011, in time, has it changed? Well, we haven't had another attack, right? But what is everyone always waiting for? The next attack. Well, the only way it changes in time is if you see the problem and we help to fix what's going on. Ignoring it will never cause it to go away. You know, imagine planting a peach tree or a plum tree out in your yard, and of course you want it to bring forth fruit. And if you'll give that tree all the ingredients that is needed to bring forth the fruit, it can do its job. If it's lacking water, you help with the water. If it's lacking in anything, you help with it. Now, imagine you go out to the tree and you stand and start screaming for your fruit. Does the tree yield you any more fruit? No, it won't. You get mad, so you cut it down. Does that help yield more fruit? No, it doesn't. If the tree has a disease or there's something wrong with the tree, and you know that it needs help, does ignoring it help the tree? Leads to the death of the tree. So compassion is seeing a problem and helping put forth the effort in educating someone in a caring way. Ignoring it won't fix it, and throwing things and yelling won't fix it. But putting forth effort in education, that is what truly fixes it. And that's what the peaceful solution truly focuses on. And compassion is to be showed from the youngest to the oldest. And with that in mind, of course, looking over to page 117 with what we're reading here about individuals and society as a whole, 117 is known as the hope page in the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. And we've always referred to it as that because this is truly the page that really explains what we're expected to do as an individual and to expound into society, or to expand into society. And notice it says at the top here, just as negative behaviors ripple out their devastating effects, positive character ripples out positive effects. So everything we see that's negative, that ripples out from negative decisions, positive things can do the same thing. There's just not as much positive going on in society as there is negative. So we always see the negative things. When you watch the evening news, start looking at it and classify it. If they do 8 stories or 7 stories or 10 stories, start writing it down in positive and negative stories. You'll see very quickly it's 90% negative, and at the end of the week, there'll be a nice little story about something positive they found for the week to get you into the weekend. And that's kind of the run of the mill, the way news is done, because there's not much positive things going on in society today. Well, continuing, it says, this is how we can affect others in a positive way. And this is the positive ripple effect. We can choose to conscientiously demonstrate positive character. The effects ripple outward, giving others hope. Our actions of doing the right thing will actually give others hope that our society and world can change for the better. That is one of the greatest challenges we face in the Peaceful Solution, is getting people to believe there's hope if we start to change. But we have to make a difference. And the greatest thing that most people face is, I want my rights. I've been given empowerment. I'm due my rights. Everyone needs to get in line with the rules, and then life can be better. But everyone, every individual on this earth has to examine themselves and look and say, what am I doing that's helping this negative ripple effect go outwardly? And what can I do to change that? Well, then you have to ask yourself, well, how can they do that? You have to be educated. We have to know, well, what are we doing that's negative? All of us have something we're doing in our life, if we truly look at it, that we can find that it might not seem negative on the first or second ripple, but when we look at that ripple 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 outwardly, we find out it's having a pretty negative effect. It didn't look so bad when I first did it, but now that I can see it into next week, this wasn't so smart after all. It's something I need to change. And that's what we have to look at. Society wants to see the here and now. And then when things go wrong, we ask why. And then we say we can explain it. And then we say we really don't know why. Well, it starts at the home. It starts at the home. And that's right. You can't make it without the teachers. I just heard someone say that. You have to have teachers. Now, for instance, continuing on here, it says if everyone in a community decides to practice honesty, then there would be no theft in that area. And that's something that David was covering last class about how prices would actually drop. And he was talking about lumber prices and all of these other things that they've just skyrocketed to where they make your eyes pop out when you go into a store. But continuing on here, in the second paragraph, it says the ripple effect from such a phenomenon, and this is everyone being honest and so forth, using positive character, would stretch far and wide. First, the number of crimes, arrests, as well as the police officers on patrol would be greatly reduced. Now, I almost wanted to bring videos tonight to show, but I think there's enough violence being shown that we can get the picture without showing them. And this week in the news, they had where a 13-year-old was shot, and they've had where other people were shot, and they were showing how the police shot them. One lady says, officer says, I accidentally grabbed my gun instead of my taser. You know, I don't know. I would think that when you're in a situation where you think there's danger, I don't know. I'm not here to criticize the young man or the woman that pulled her gun or the police officer. But if we as a society go, that's the problem. No, that's 20 ripple effects away from the initial problem. What was the problem that built up to all of this commotion taking place? We have to address that. If you can alleviate the pond that dropped in, or the stone that dropped in the pond, and all the negativity that went out from there, think of how much can be removed that never has to take place. And you think, I heard a lot saying, well, it's because cops have guns. And then I seen where in February of this year, a police officer in New Mexico, highway patrolman, walks up beside of a car, and he's on the passenger side on the interstate, and he's very polite. You can hear all the conversation taking place. Young man, and he tells the man, I see you have a weapon there in your car. I'm going to walk back to my cop car, and I'm going to let you put that out for me. As he's walking back, you can tell he's over-trusting in this man, because the man gets out and shoots him and kills him. Shoots him multiple times. And of course, as our president said, and this is a quote, why in God's name, as the president said, why in God's name would someone need a gun that would shoot so many bullets? And, the first thing that come to my mind was I wonder how Iraq feels, Afghanistan feels, and all these other countries that we've invaded, and we gave every soldier a gun that holds many, many bullets. If it's wrong here at home, and we think it's bringing negative effects, then why are we doing it all around the world? And that's just a question. I'm not condemning the president. I'm posing a question to the president. If it's wrong and it seems to fuel negative decision-making, why are we doing it on a global scale? Why are we putting so many billions of dollars into these things? And once again, that's nothing compared to the Baltic states and NATO and Russia speaking of nuclear war right now. That's a very small thing when you compare that. But it's the cops' fault. No, it's the community's fault. Well, everybody's arguing, but nobody's coming up with answers. Everybody's looking at the end result of a decision, but they're neglecting to see where did it go wrong from the beginning. Well, it's a lack of education, and this hope is gone from society. Now, continuing on here in the third paragraph, it says, once again, well, let's finish the second paragraph because we need it for the third paragraph. It says, once again, and this is in the middle, since there would be no shoplifting, the price of merchandise would also be significantly lowered. In addition to this, there would be a ripple effect of peace and security throughout the community. The above scenario might sound too great to be true, and in society today, most people would say that. That's just impossible. And when you look at what's going on, if you didn't realize where these problems were starting, you would think it is impossible. So the above scenario might sound too great to be true, and you're probably thinking, yeah, right, not in my lifetime, but every once in a while, there are articles about individuals who choose to be honest, compassionate, courageous, and responsible. If one person could learn the value of having a positive character and treating others with compassion and respect, notice it gives hope that others can as well. If one person can do it, why can't others? Our society calls people who demonstrate positive character traits and go out of their way to help others heroes. Now, that used to be the way we defined a hero, but, today a hero is the one that you have a mass shooting and this guy had a gun, so he shot this guy who was doing the mass shooting. He prevented others from dying. He's a hero. The peaceful solution would say, can we go all the way back to see what led to this young man or this young woman, mostly young men, very rare to hear of a young woman doing it. Why did they do it? What started it? What was the teaching in their home or the lack thereof? What was the peer pressure, the conformity, the influences? What took place in their life to be that way? Turning back over here to what I've learned, because we're going to cover pretty much a lot of the same pages in these bullet points that we're reading here. Looking at the next bullet point, the ripple effect on page 121, the ripple effect from a positive moral character can also produce hope. And that's what we're reading right now. Hope, motivating and encouraging of others to internalize those same character traits within themselves. And remember what integrity is, a person of integrity. It's the internalization that shows through their actions this positive character. Well, when we're speaking about this, and remember we read about this role modeling that takes place, the parents on page 35, we talked about that. But if you look over to also, let's look over to let's go to page 70 real quick. Page 70, because we're talking about a society. And as a society, we tend to classify society as one thing. And if you remember society, when we first started this chapter, I'll read it to you real quick. You can write it in your notes. But it's on page 105. And it says it's the last sentence of the first paragraph. It says, when a group of people live under a common body of laws and share common values and interests, they are called a society. Now, I ask a question to each one of you, and I know there's many different countries watching. And individualize this as not just in your country, just use your city that you're living in. Does your city live under a common body of laws and share common values and interests? And I want you to start seeing this when you watch the news. You'll see in the news where there's a lot of confrontation, where there's a lot of buildup of anger. You'll hear the U.S. say, well, we're looking at the U.S. interest in this situation. You'll hear Russia say, we're looking at the Russian interest in this area. China will say the China's interest. Taiwan will say Taiwan's interest. Myanmar worries about Myanmar's interest. Everybody's worried about their own interest. But even when you get into the interest of the country, well, is that the interest of the country or the interest of a few? The interest of, some? Is that 100%? Is that 60%? How many people are involved in this interest that we're showing? And then that common body of laws we spoke about. Well, and these common values. If we all have common values and common interest in morality, we should have more peace on earth. We should have more peace in our lives. But looking over to page 70, look at the last paragraph, and it says, here's an example. Your friend tells you that he or she is going to shoplift a necklace from the mall. If you're really her friend, you will come with her to be her lookout. Now, that's what she's telling you. So if you're her friend, you'll look out for her. In this case, you're being pressured to make a bad choice to keep your friendship. The powers of peers to influence the way we think and act, notice it should not be underestimated. Now, peers, that affects us in our society. It's not just school. It could be work. It's that ripple effect. Imagine the ripple effect that if you go and watch out for your friend and you get caught stealing. Ending up in jail was not the first problem. Not having the courage to stand up and stand against what was being offered here, that is the problem. Well, what caused that courage not to be there? Notice once again who the peaceful solution puts this on. So ask yourself, you individualize this. Ask yourself, how can negative peer pressure affect your character, and decide in advance what you will say when approached with any negative request. Now, those are some common values the peaceful solution are saying that should be on a global scale. We should see them globally. We should see that put forth in every home on the face of this earth. We should ask ourselves, if we're bringing harm to someone else, ourselves, or the environment, we should actually examine that. We should examine in detail, what are we doing that could either build or tear down someone else. And of course, look over also to page 71 and look here at the last paragraph on page 71, because we're talking about in the peaceful solution to give someone hope, making that positive choice. You're becoming a role model, or as we read in chapter 3, a VIP, a very important person. In page 71, it says, by becoming a person of integrity, and remember that's found on page 18, the definition, that's letting all of these positive internal parts be shown on the outside through your actions, you too can become a role model and influence someone else to attain a positive moral character. So that role modeling, that's part of that ripple effect, where positive decisions are made and it ripples throughout society. And we can see the effects of that if we do it. So just think about it. In the same way you admire and emulate others, someone could be admiring and emulating the true values and positive character you're demonstrating. Now, that also is on a two-way street. Imagine these young children that you see a lot here on YouTube, it's no end to it, to where you see a sign on the door of your local store. Walmart's kind of throughout everywhere. We've traveled many countries and we've seen Walmart in almost every country we went to. It's kind of on a global scale. But Walmart has a sign on the door, and I'll just use them. You could say Lowe's, Home Depot. You could use any store, but we'll just use Walmart for now. They have a sign on the store door that says you need to wear a mask when you enter the store. That's the store's request. Now, when you go into the stores, you'll notice maybe 50%, 60% have masks on, the others don't. And every day it seems, there's argumentation, there's fights break out over put your mask on, I'm not wearing a mask. And this is in front of children. Now, the rule at the front of the door says to come into our establishment, you are required to wear a mask. Obviously, if someone's inside the store and they're not wearing a mask, they're breaking the rule. That was the rule the establishment put on their door. That's their right. Everybody talks about having their rights. And you'll notice that the people that are in the store without wearing a mask, it's my right to not wear a mask. Okay, if you set rights to your house where you live, will you be upset if someone comes in your house and starts doing what they want to do? You can't wear your shoes in my house. Well, I'm going to wear my shoes in your house. That's my right. And you see how this aggression takes place. But here you're in another establishment, two people, and there's children watching, and people are fighting and arguing over a mask. You almost want to stop and say, does anyone know why you're wearing a mask? Has anyone forgotten the reason for putting the mask on your face? It wasn't to come to Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot. It's because there's a pandemic going on. There's a virus that's being created due to some bad decisions, and it's spreading. That's why we're wearing masks to begin with. But the whole concept of why there's a mask that's required is totally gone. And think about what that puts in the mind of children. And how are they going to be able to make positive decisions from seeing this confusion that comes out from these role models, whether positive or negative? And think about, is there hope being put into the minds of those children? If I was a child and I seen two people fighting in Walmart or Home Depot or Lowe's or anywhere else over should they or should they not wear a mask, I'm going to be really confused. And I'm probably going to side with my parent that's fighting because that's the one I know the best. And if they're in the right, well, I don't know that beating someone for not wearing a mask is going to cause them to wear a mask, and it's not going to stop a pandemic. So that's not the right choice. Explaining these things to our children and to others on why it's important that we do it, that would make a difference to others. But keep this role modeling in mind, and the hope that we're talking about, that we've read in these bullet points. Turn back over to page 121, because we want to remember the hope by making right choices. That's being a role model. And always remember page 117. That's one that if you're having a bad day, or if you just want to give up, that's a page that can remind you of why you do it to begin with. Why you don't just walk away and, I give up, I'll just go be part of society. Well, society's supposed to have a calming body of rules that it's living in. And you're a part of society when you say, I'll just go be a part of society. You're already a part of society. You gave up on doing the positive things, and now it's the I don't care, however it works out, I'll just live that way. Well, that's what society's doing right now, and it's not working. It's not working at all. So here back on page 121, the next bullet point here says, never underestimate the power of a moral character in my life and the ripple effect it has on society and the world. turn over to page 120 and remember what we spoke about, this positive role model. Well, 120 is right beside us here. This role modeling and being an example to others, and remember the values that we have to have, and turn back over to that. Let's read it really quickly, because these values, remember the role modeling of parents, and page 6 is where we learn about values, but this role modeling of parents, this teaching of teachers, whether it be positive or negative, this is what determines those values. And always remind yourself of what these values are, and then ask yourself, what do I value? Are they positive or negative? And notice here on page 6, it says, values are what you believe in or feel strongly about. They also, notice, play a key role in the development of your character. So that's something else you could say, don't underestimate this. If we have a negative value, and it could be, well, I believe in doing all of these positive things, but I just have one weakness. Marijuana I just think is okay. Even though scientific studies have shown that it's detrimental to the body, it actually is a roadblock to learning, I personally think it's okay. Well, that value is negative, and it can play a key role into the success or the failure of ourselves. But notice there's a key here, and this is something that's expected. It doesn't always take place. Notice it says, as you mature and grow, your parents share their values with you. Now, your parents will share your values, or the guardians share their values, but I want to ask yourself, is society really maturing and growing to be positive? A maturity means they're making better decisions, making sound decisions, doing things that don't bring harm. Maturity in character is determined by how much we choose positive over negative. You can be 90 years old and still be very immature in character. We can be 50 or 60 and still be very immature in character. In fact, that's very common when you hear it when someone's 20 or 30 all the time. They're just immature. They'll grow up eventually. Well, they've had 30 years. They've had 20 years. Where's the education? Because the education stopped at 18 in our society. Now they're on their own. You're kind of thrown out the door unless you go to college. Well, these values, once again, they can't be underestimated. And look down to the last paragraph here. It says there are many different types of values as there are people. That could be positive or negative. No two people are alike, even members of the same family. But notice this right here. Based upon experiences and interactions, we come to value different things. Now, we have a room full of people here, and of course everybody's socially distanced, and we have many people watching from all around the world. If we were to start talking about our experiences, we all have different experiences, whether it be from going to school, being raised. Did we have a mother in the house, a father in the house? Did we have both parents in the house? Did we have parents at all? We're the guardians. Some people come from adoption agencies. Some people still have their grandparents alive. I never really knew my grandfathers. I've always listened to people that talk about their grandfathers. I don't know what that's like. Never experienced that. I see Prince Charles, who went through almost his whole life with his mother and his father. And I thought about that as I watched the news that were showing the funerals. He's walking behind his father's coffin, and I thought, man, what would it be like to be that old and your father still be in your life? That would be amazing. But then I thought, what would it be like to never had a father in your life? That wouldn't be so great. But does that determine what kind of person I am? Well, what determines what kind of person I am is the experiences and the interactions that I've had, and of course these values that are placed on things, whether they're positive or negative. And looking over to 120 here, back to page 120, these values that we're talking about, 120, it says positive moral character can affect the world. And it says honesty, respect, and truthfulness. Honesty, respect, and truthfulness. And notice also compassion. And that's using empathy, putting ourselves in the other person's shoes and understanding bad decisions are made because of a lack of education 99% of the time. Are all positive moral character traits when applied to how nations interact with each other and can result in tolerance, understanding, and peace around the whole world. These things can be done. And you notice the example we give here is one nation such as the nation of Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, also known as the PLO. Think about that and what we've seen. And if you remember, that was an agreement written between those two countries over 20 years ago that said that they would, in 7 years, would make peace. And if you've never researched that or looked it up, please go online and research the Oslo Accords. That was signed in October of 1993 is when they signed it. Huge ceremony on the White House lawn there. Now, they agreed in principle to do these things. Now, in 7 years, they said they would do this. We're many, many, many years down the road. Hasn't been accomplished. In fact, they even stopped their agreement halfway into it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with that, go on YouTube and research that. Research everything you can about this Oslo Accord and this situation right here, because as President Obama said at the UN about 6 years ago, treaties and written agreements does not bring peace. Peace is hard work. It requires individuals to put forth the effort to bring peace. And that's on a global scale. Two men in this situation being Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat representing their countries. Well, the opinions of two men didn't bring peace. In fact, it led to Yitzhak Rabin even losing his life. So when you see these things, you realize that two people, they had hope. They put forth positive initiative. They didn't have support behind them, but that doesn't mean support can't be gained. Because we see when the support wasn't behind them, the situation hasn't changed. And many people have still died. So thinking about that, and that's just one example. That's probably the most popular example we have in our society today of a peace agreement that hasn't been upheld. But looking back on that, and going back to page 121, and we talked about how this compassion and these positive character traits can actually bring a world of peace, and that's a world here on page 121. Notice a world that is safe and peaceful can be achieved, but it's only when these character traits are used and it ripples outwardly. Whenever leadership teachers, parents, guardians, whenever they teach those coming after them, generations, their role models, remember what we talked about with positive role models, whenever all of this is applied, we can make a better society. We can put an end to the rise in murders in the U.S. is explained, and then follow it up by, we still don't know why murders in the U.S. rose so much. Well, we have to quit looking at our children going, let me tell you how and why. And then we get into the explanation, I don't have a clue. When we just blame something, well, that's not going to work, and it hasn't worked. In all these years, it hasn't worked. Back on page 121 here, we have the second to last bullet point. It says, if I can demonstrate a positive moral character, then I can motivate others to do the same. And they, in turn, can motivate and encourage even more people to acquire character traits such as compassion, respect, and honesty. So remember what we've read so far about the peer pressure. Remember what we read about role modeling. Remember what we read about the parents being in the homes. And then turn back over to page 80. Because a lot of these things that we're reading right now is going to be found on page 120, but we want to go back to page 80 because remember we talked about not underestimating these influences. We talked about the violence of influences, and then we talked about how the answer is setting our mind in advance. And if we set our mind in advance, we don't get caught up into the argumentation, cops shouldn't have guns, this young boy shouldn't have been shot, this shouldn't have taken place. We can all agree bad things shouldn't take place. Why are they taking place? Why are they in this position? Why was a 13-year-old boy out with another young man, and why were they running the streets at night with no supervision? Why? You can't just look and say, this child was killed, it's a bad thing. It is a bad thing, but why were all these ingredients put together that we brought forth this situation? We have to put an end to that. Well, setting our mind in advance, once again, setting our mind in advance. If you notice here, at the very beginning it says, have you ever heard the saying, it's all in your head? Most people say it sarcastically, but there's some truth to it. Whether you are aware of it or not, so this is whether you're knowledgeable or not, every action begins with a thought. Setting your mind in advance to maintain your positive character traits begins by first considering just how important it is to have a moral character. So once again, setting our mind to make the right decision is very important. And then notice the next step. The next step is to make up your mind to not be influenced to do anything that will compromise your character. In other words, determine in your mind that no one can talk you into doing something you know is wrong. And in the influences we've seen where someone was asking for a lookout to watch out so they could steal a purse or something. Well, this is called setting your mind in advance. And once again, it's very important. If you look down to watch your thoughts here, the next section, it says a very critical aspect of maintaining your positive character is being aware of your thoughts. Well, thoughts in society today, what we're seeing, this ripple effect that's taking place in society today, the thoughts are, we should do this to this cop because he shot this boy. Or we should do this to this female cop because she shot this young man. We need to be asking ourselves what led to these situations taking place, because we're still looking at the ripple effect that's 20 to 30 ripples from the stone that was originally dropped in the pond. That's the source of the problem. That's where we have to look. It's like looking at Palestine and Israel. What we're seeing is a ripple effect of much hatred that is taught. That is taught. It's important to remember that. That is taught. And then here on page 120, we see that the very last paragraph here, well, let's go up to the one before that. It starts off with, instead of spending billions of dollars on military and nuclear weapons, which is astronomical, the money that gets spent. Notice it says we would feed the hungry and find cures for the hundreds of diseases that kill thousands of people each year. Do not underestimate, once again we hear this here, do not underestimate the importance of a positive moral character in the life of an individual, society, and the world. A positive character is to be valued, once again, is to be deemed important and maintained, that's continual education, by all people if we want our world to be a safe and secure place for everyone. And last but not least, here on page 121, notice this last bullet point. It says, just like a stone dropped in a pond, positive moral character can ripple out, affecting others far and wide. And if you look back to page 105, that was the first page we started with here, the introduction. Here on the very last paragraph, it says, we live in a society where our need to belong makes us interdependent upon another. Because we rely on and need each other, our behaviors affect one another in a positive and negative ways. Our ability to affect each other is like a stone dropped into a pond, causing one ripple after the next, each one larger than the one before. So please keep that in mind, and if you don't have it written down, write down page 117, what we call the hope page, right with that. Because once again, when we make a decision and we see the first ripple, remember that as they go out, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like making a choice, as the author of The Peaceful Solution has said one time. When you make a bad choice and you think, I remember The Peaceful Solution telling me that there'd be a consequence. I ain't get no consequence. But as you get older in life, you age a little bit. You go to the doctor one day because something's hurting. You know, heart's not working right, lungs aren't breathing right, legs aren't moving right. Oh, well, this is a result of something you done very young. Oh, so I did have to pay for what I did. I didn't get by with it. There's nothing we can do that's negative that won't affect someone. If we're doing negative things, committing negative actions on a global scale or even in our local communities, someone suffers. And if we think, well, I didn't suffer, it's okay. Someone suffers, and if you're okay with someone suffering from your choices, you have to accept the fact you're going to suffer from someone else's choices. And that's not a place we want to be in our society. So we're going to stop right here. Our next class will be on 421. It'll be at 5:30, so that'll just be in a few days. Once again, it'll be at 5:30, and we'll begin the next chapter. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again.